Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. If you've seen my previous couple of videos, you can see that I've been out with the OM system OM-1 Mark II, the 150-400 f4.5 lens, the 8-25mm lens, and the 90mm macro lens from OM system. So I've been using that gear a lot the past month. This is going to be basically the culmination of what I think of the OM system gear, specifically the OM-1 Mark II. The OM system loaned me this gear as part of a loaner program. So they sent me the gear in exchange for making these videos, truthful videos about the gear. So all of these opinions are mine. OM system has no influence on what I say in these videos. Everything I am showing you and telling you is my take on the gear, what I think about it, how I was able to use it, and what I was able to get with the gear. And part of the loaner program, what I really wanted to do was see what the gear was capable of. So I actually pushed the gear to basically do my own personal project in the time period that I had this OM system gear. On top of making the YouTube videos that I've been making, I've also been getting footage and gathering footage for a mini project, which is going to be kind of covering the diversity of the Connecticut forests around me. So I was using the 150-400mm lens, the 8-25, and the 90mm macro lens to really show the diversity of plant life and animal life that is in the forests around me. And I'm going to be working on putting that video together for you, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. There's a lot of footage I'm going through, so I'm trying to make a short little documentary film. And the footage in that film is all going to be shot on the OM system gear that I was loaned. I do a lot of video work for land trusts and conservation organizations. I need to be able to get good footage for these videos that I produce, and this was my way of basically seeing what this OM system gear was capable of and seeing if I could get the footage that I needed to for this kind of project. Now this video is going to be a long one. I've tried to break it up down in chapters below, so if you want to skip ahead to certain sections, if you're interested in just a specific part, you can go down below in the description and skip to those parts that interest you. I also wanted to thank those that wrote in with questions about the OM system gear. I really appreciate hearing from you, and I'm hoping this video is going to answer those questions as best as I can. There were unfortunately some questions that I just don't know the answer to. Questions regarding printing and that sort of thing. I don't do a lot of printing, and I didn't do any printing with the photos that I took with the OM system gear. And I'm sorry I can't answer those questions for you. I'm just not the one to answer those questions. I don't know what I don't know, and I don't want to give you wrong information with that. But I'm hoping that the other questions, specifically ones on autofocus and image quality and high ISO images, hopefully that will be answered in this video here. And I have a lot that I want to show you in this video. What are we going to cover in this video? So just starting off with weight and size comparison. So that's a big one. Obviously, I'm just going to be comparing it to what I'm typically using in the field, which is Nikon gear. From there, we're going to get into kind of talking about the portability, versatility, ease of use. And then we're going to get into stabilization. We're going to go talking about autofocus capabilities, the different modes, the tracking, how it functions. Again, do some screen recordings, viewfinder view, so you can see what it's doing in the field. And we're going to talk about differences in photo mode and video mode. So there's differences there. And then we're going to get into image quality. We're going to go through a lot of raw files so you can see what they look like right out of camera. And then we're going to talk about the high ISO and low light images. You'll be able to see what raw files look like right out of camera with high ISOs. And then I'm just going to show you the same photo or a photo in a similar sequence with just some Lightroom noise editing. And you'll be able to see how easily these files clean up. And then that's also where we're going to do the comparison photos of what I have from the Nikon to photos from the OM-1 Mark II. I was able to go out on a really early morning down to a local pond and bring both systems with me. So I have my Nikon gear and the OM system gear. I was able to set up the camera side by side and take some photos of kingfishers and green herons down along this pond. So I was able to really get some nice side-by-side comparison. Similar photos, obviously the birds were constantly moving, so the background's changing, that sort of thing. But I was able to use similar settings in both systems, and I'm going to show you side-by-side raw files on my screen here and give you a chance to try to guess which file is which system. Go through camera features, customization, and then we're going to just kind of wrap up with what's the value for the money, who is this OM system gear for, and then my overall take on the OM system gear and my overall thoughts on it. Again, there's going to be chapters down below. You can skip ahead to the parts that interest you. Okay, so let's get into weight comparison. But before I do that, I just want to mention something real quick. This is not going to be a very technical video. We're not going to get into differences in sensors or pixel density or anything like that. I simply don't care about those things. I'm not the one to answer those questions about those things. What matters to me is what I'm able to get with the system in my hand. So it doesn't really matter what's inside of it. I want to see what I can get with it in the field, in the real world situation, and that's hopefully what this video is going to show you. So weight comparison, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers up on the screen here so you'll be able to see just comparison size of what I'm talking about here. So I typically shoot with the Nikon Z9, so we have a weight there with a card and battery of about 2.9 pounds, okay? Z6 III, which is pretty comparable size to the OM-1 Mark II, is 1.7 pounds with a card and batteries. And then the OM-1 Mark II is 1.3 pounds with card and batteries. Now, dimensional wise, the Z9 is obviously a big camera. It's about 5.9 by 5.9 by 3.6 inches. So it's a large box there. It's got the built-in grip. Obviously, it's a larger camera. The Z6 III is much more comparable in size. It's about 5.5 inches wide, 4 inches by 2.9 inches. The OM-1 Mark II is 5.3 by 3.6 and then by 2.9 inches. So it's a much more similar size form factor. I will say that the grip for the OM-1 Mark II is a little bit deeper, so you're able to kind of get a better, I feel like for my hand, I'm able to get a better grip on the OM-1 Mark II. So I was really able to just hold the OM-1 Mark II one hand, and I was just have a full grip on the camera. So that's one thing I noticed there. And then the lens comparison, again, this is not going to be a perfect comparison because this is just the gear that I have. Okay, this is what I'm typically using. That's what I'm comparing it to. There's a whole myriad of other lenses you can compare this stuff to. The OM system, 150 to 400 millimeter f4.5 lens is 4.14 pounds, and it is about 12.5 inches long. The Nikon Z400 millimeter 2.8 lens, that's going to be 6.5 pounds, and it is 15 inches long. So that's typically what I'm using out in the field. I also use the Nikon Z100 to 400 millimeter lens, the f4.5 to 5.6. That one comes in at about 3.2 pounds and is 8.7 inches long. The 400 millimeter 2.8 and the 100 to 400 are the lenses I typically use. They're the ones that I own. So that's what I'm comparing the weight and size to. Obviously, there's going to be a big difference in focal length coverage, with the 150 to 400 millimeter having an effective focal length on the crop sensor, with micro four thirds being basically 300 millimeter to 800 millimeter, and then all the way up to 1,000 millimeters with the built-in teleconverter. So total weight comparison, the OM-1 Mark II with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens combined is going to be about 5.5 pounds, just under 5.5 pounds. Okay, so it's a nice lightweight system. Z9 plus the 400 2.8 lens is going to bring you in about 9.4 pounds. And then just to throw in some other comparisons, Z6 III and 400 2.8 is going to be 8.2 pounds. The Z9 100 to 400 combination is going to be 6.1 pounds. Z6 III 180 to 600 is going to be 6 pounds. And Z6 III and the 100 to 400 is going to be about 4.9 pounds. So there's many options out there. Again, this is just what I use, what I cover. It's pretty obvious. The OM-1 Mark II and the 150 to 400 millimeter lens at 5.45 pounds is going to give you the lightest weight option to give you the effective focal length that it does. It's a huge focal length range. And it's also important to note that these weights are only the camera gear that you're going to have in your hand. The advantage, and we're going to talk about this, one of the advantages of the OM system gear is that you basically don't need to carry a tripod. So you can eliminate that weight you're carrying as well, which is pretty much required for using the Z9 and 400 2.8 lens. If you're doing video work, you're pretty much going to need a tripod. So that's going to be another extra X amount of pounds that you're going to have to carry with you as well. So keep that in mind in these weight comparisons. It's a really important thing to consider. This is just the gear in your hand, not the extra stuff you have to carry on your back. So let's get into the next factor, which is portability, ease of use, versatility, that sort of thing. Now, there's no surprise here that OM system, that they're known to be, micro four thirds systems are known to be a lightweight system. They're compact because of the crop factor for the sensor. You're able to have the effective focal length of a much longer lens or much larger lens in full frame in a smaller package. So there's no surprise that the OM system was hugely versatile. It was so lightweight, it was easy to carry, it was so nice to carry. A lot of times I was carrying the 150 to 400 millimeter lens on a chest mount, on the cotton carrier mount. I was able to put that on my chest easily or just carry it in my hand. It was so lightweight, it was so much nicer to carry than what I'm typically carrying. It was just a freeing experience of not being weighted down by your gear. You're able to move around easier. By the end of the day, you're not dead tired from carrying around all of your gear. And for me, I carry around a lot of gear to put together YouTube videos, to put together footage for clients. I have a lot of lenses, I have a lot of camera bodies. I'm carrying all this stuff around with me in my hands or on my back, and weight of gear is a huge factor. A lot of people are commenting, oh, is there any advantage other than weight for this OM system gear? Well, the weight is a huge factor. I feel like people don't necessarily realize how big of a factor it plays until you actually get a lightweight camera in your hand and you're like, oh wow, I'm actually willing to go and try this other thing because I can do that quickly and easily without having to move my tripod, adjust things, and then put down this heavy gear. Or you're out 8 hours, the end of the 8 hours, and you find something you want to try to photograph, but it's like, well, do I really want to have to set up my gear to get that photo that I need to? Well, with the OM system gear, number one, you're not as tired at the end of the day. And number two, you don't have to worry about setting up your tripod or anything like that to get video footage of this cool thing that you see along the trail on your way back to your car. So you can just go over there, take the footage, and that's it. You're done. You got it. You don't need to set up a tripod. So the weight might sound like a really small thing, but until you realize how nice it is to be using lightweight gear, it is a really huge change and a huge advantage. And it's, again, like I said, a really freeing experience. And there were multiple times when I was out using this OM system gear where I actually lost track of time out in the field, which hasn't happened in a really long time. I didn't have to worry about setting up a tripod. I could just reposition, recompose, and I was able to work on composition and be creative rather than have to think, okay, how the heck am I going to set up my tripod to get this video footage? And am I going to scare the wildlife in the meantime? Is the wildlife going to move in the process? So it is a huge thing to consider and a huge factor. And it's not just numbers and weight. A lot goes into having lighter gear. And just to kind of put one final point here, I was able to carry the OM-1 Mark II, the 150 to 400 millimeter lens, which has the effective focal length of 1,000 millimeters. I was able to go out to the grasslands, have my daughter on my back, and be able to get handheld video footage at 1,000 millimeters with this lens, with this setup, without a tripod. I think that alone speaks to how versatile this gear is. And that just ties us right into the next point, which is stabilization. So the stabilization in the OM-1 Mark II combined with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens, which I was able to use, has the effect of 8.5 stops of stabilization. So what that means is, and I'm going to show you basically the viewfinder, what it looks like in the viewfinder. In photo mode, when you have the stabilization turned on, you can have different stabilization options. And for me, I was using back button autofocus. When you half press the shutter, it engages the stabilization. And you can see in this video clip here from the screen that before you half press the shutter, there's some wobble, there's some shake, especially when you're doing the effective focal length of like 800 millimeters, there's going to be some movement in the lens there. But when you half press the shutter, start engaging the stabilization, the viewfinder goes basically completely still. Okay, so that is the stabilization that you're able to have. You stabilize the view, you have a nice, clean, stable view, you're able to see what you're taking photos of, and that allows you to get away with having lower shutter speeds than you would expect for subjects that obviously aren't moving. If you're having a moving subject, you still need that faster shutter speed. But the stabilization kicks in and you're able to get some really stable footage handheld at long focal lengths at slower shutter speeds. Now the same thing holds true in video mode. When you start recording the video, you're able to have some different stabilization settings in video. For me, I was typically using it just so that it was stabilized in the sensor and not digitally. And you're able to adjust the stabilization settings. So for me, when I was doing handheld standing, I had it so that it was in the +1 stabilization. So it increased the stabilization a little bit. Just to compare, here's a view through the Nikon Z9 viewfinder, and you can see there is some stabilization that occurs, but it's not nearly as stable as with the OM-1 stabilization. A lot of times when I'm doing video work, handheld video work for my Nikon stuff, I either need to do some editing with it in the software, or I need to shoot it in slower motion so that I can slow the footage down and try to eliminate some of that wobble that's involved there. So the Nikon gear still has stabilization in it, but it's not nearly as good as what the OM system gear has. And it just allows you to have the confidence that you're gonna be able to get this stable video, handheld, and combined with the lightweightness of the gear, it's not a burden to have to hand hold this because the gear is so much lighter. With this, I was able to just get that footage. Now this stabilization allowed me to get some footage that I otherwise would not have gotten. And one easy example that comes to mind for this is I was hiking along a trail. I came across this barred owl that was up along the side of the trail. I was able to raise my camera slowly, get a couple series of photos, and get a short clip of video before the owl eventually flew off. And these were at pretty slow shutter speeds, didn't have to set up a tripod. I was able to get these photos, and they're photos I'm really happy with. And I really like, the lighting and everything, how it looks. So this is just one clear example of this lightweight, portable, stabilized gear. It will be allowed to get you some photos that you otherwise may not have been able to get. All right, so let's get into autofocus. So this is a big one. A lot of people have questions about autofocus capabilities, and we're going to break this up into photo mode and then video mode. So we're going to talk about photo mode first. And just like every other, pro level camera, there's a lot of autofocus options in the OM-1 Mark II. You're able to shoot in both single autofocus, continuous autofocus. You're able to have tracking. There's a lot of different subject detections you can do, including human, motorsports, planes, trains, birds, and then the dogs and cats and similar animals. Very similar to basically any other camera you're going to find with tracking. And there's also a lot of different target modes you can choose from as well. So one thing I really liked about the autofocus target modes is you're able to have custom size modes. So there's 4 different custom options, 4 different custom sizes you can create in the OM-1 Mark II in the target mode menu there. And that's typically the settings that I was using. I was using the whole area mode and then these 4 custom modes, and I didn't even use any of the other autofocus modes. And what I did was I had the C1 set to the smallest box, so basically a single point with tracking, and then C2, C3, and C4 were larger boxes as you kind of go up there. And that basically covered everything I was photographing. I was also able to customize the camera, so I was able to turn off and on tracking with a button. And that really helped as well in instances where the autofocus was getting tripped up on foliage, because every mirrorless system you're going to use, the autofocus can get easily tripped up on vegetation around your subject, or a stick that has a really bright spot in it, or even if your subject is very cryptic and they have amazing camouflage and they blend in with their surroundings so much, your autofocus might not recognize that that is the bird. Or if there's just a lot of speckling on the plumage of the animal, well, it might lock onto something on its body versus its eye, because it's just simply hard to figure out which is the eye of the animal. So there's no exceptions to this. I have problems with my Nikon Z9, the same kind of things, and I'll show you examples here with some screen recordings when I was out photographing the green herons. So let's first show you the OM-1 Mark II. So this is an example of the green heron. There's some grasses and such in the foreground. But once the bird moves far enough away from that grass, the camera does a really nice job of autofocusing it, and it locks onto the bird, and you're able to get this shot here. Just so we're on the same page of what we're looking at here, the red box is the autofocus target area, and then when subject detection is engaged, these white boxes will appear. In this case, it recognized that the bird was in the frame, and the larger box shows that it's finding the body of the bird, and then when the eye of the bird is recognized, this smaller box will also appear over the eye. And then these green boxes are showing up when I'm pressing the autofocus on button, and that's showing what is in fact in focus. And it's doing a good job of recognizing the subject versus the reflection. This is pretty tough here because it's sometimes locking onto the reflection, but it's doing a good job of kind of keeping on to the actual subject rather than the reflection. Now, like I mentioned, the autofocus can get tripped up no matter what system you're using. And here's an example with the Z9 trying to photograph this water thrush as it was walking right towards me. It just kept getting tripped up on all the grass and everything else between me and the subject. Again, this isn't a perfect comparison because the water thrush is a much smaller bird, but you can still get the idea of how if you rely on the autofocus, you might lose some shots because the autofocus gets mixed up on these different things in between you and the subject. Here's another example with the Z9. The water thrush is now on the other side of me. It's kind of more out in the open on these rocks, and it's still getting tripped up a little bit by the color in the rocks and then this vegetation that's sticking up as well. To compare, here's the OM-1 Mark II, and this time I turned off the subject detect on the OM-1 Mark II because I knew I was having trouble with the Z9. And in this case, I was able to get some nice shots because I was kind of back to the DSLR days, just putting the autofocus box over the bird and it was able to lock on. You can see the green boxes locking onto the subject there, and I was able to get some nice shots because of that. Even when using the all area, the whole area mode for the OM-1 Mark II, you can see that it recognizes the subjects really quickly. In this instance, the common yellowthroat is kind of perched up on this stalk of vegetation here in the open field, and it was able to recognize the bird in the whole frame there pretty quickly, and was able to get some nice shots because of that. It's also able to do it with this eastern kingbird. Even though it was pretty far out and pretty small in frame, it recognized the bird as the subject, and then it was able to focus on it really quickly. On my first outing with the OM-1 Mark II and the 150 to 400mm lens, I went out to the grasslands, and there was a whole bunch of tree swallows that were flying around low along the field. So I decided to test out the camera and try to photograph these tree swallows in flight, which if you've ever tried to photograph tree swallows in flight, they're very erratic, they're very quick, so they're a really tough subject for any camera to photograph. But I had really good results with this combination, and I think it was the combination of how good the autofocus was and how light the gear was. I was able to handhold for most of the time and get some really nice shots and be nice and fluid with my movement of tracking these birds in flight. And you can see the autofocus is locking onto the subjects really well, even though they're moving really quick in the frame. And I have a really narrow field of view here, pretty much at 800mm. And I don't have a comparison to show you side by side, but from my previous experience with the Z9, the OM-1 Mark II was doing a better job of recognizing the birds and locking onto them in flight compared to how the Z9 does when I'm using the whole area mode. Now the biggest question, of course, is, which autofocus is better? And honestly, I think they're both fantastic. In real world situations, you're going to have success with either one of these. Obviously with mirrorless systems, you're going to have to be aware that if there's a lot of distracting elements around your subjects, you're going to have to be aware of that and compensate for that, either using a smaller autofocus box, turning off subject detection, and working around different things. And it really comes down to just knowing your system and how it operates in different situations. Okay, so we talked about autofocus in photo mode. Now, what about video mode? So this is where things get a little bit different. The OM-1 Mark II is not as snappy and is not as good for autofocus in video mode based on my experience. Okay, so a lot of you asked, what is autofocus in video? I shoot a lot of video myself. How does it compare to different things? And when I'm comparing it to the Z9, obviously the Z9 has fantastic autofocus in video mode. It's able to lock and track onto subjects really well. In the OM-1 Mark II, the autofocus, like I said, isn't as quick, isn't as responsive. And there's some different modes you're able to do. The mode I was typically using the most was single autofocus with manual focus override option. There is also the continuous autofocus mode, but I found the continuous autofocus when there's some distracting elements around was not always as predictable as I would have liked. I think there was something that I set up settings-wise in the camera that was causing the continuous autofocus to not work as I think it should have based on what I read in the manual. So for me, when I had continuous autofocus mode enabled for video, the camera was autofocusing almost as if it was in full-time autofocus, so that even if I wasn't pressing the AF on button, which I had activated to engage autofocus, it was autofocusing no matter what, even if I wasn't trying to engage autofocus. So it was essentially like full-time autofocus for Nikon. And based on what I was reading in the manual, that should not have been happening. So I think there's something in the settings that I had that was causing that to happen. But I was typically using, and I had the most success with single autofocus with manual focus override. One thing I did notice was that once I engaged and started doing recording for the video, if I engaged autofocus while the recording was starting, you'll notice and you'll see in this recording here that there's kind of a pulse, and the screen kind of brightens up as the autofocus is trying to figure out what it's focusing on. So I noticed that, and this is just one of those quirks that you have to recognize and go around, is that I noticed that if I had started recording, the best thing to do would just be focus based on manual focus. Typically I do a lot of focusing in video work with manual focus anyway, so this wasn't a big jump for me. I used focus peaking. I had focus peaking on, which is an option. And again, this is where the benefit of a slightly deeper depth of field with micro four thirds comes into play, because it was a lot easier to keep a subject that was even moving in focus because just a little bit deeper of a depth of field there. And again, just a quick comparison between the Z9 and the OM-1 Mark II in video mode here. This green heron was perched on a log. It was pretty far out across the pond, and it's behind this layer of grass here in the water. So it's a tough shot for the camera to autofocus on. You can see the autofocus is struggling to pick out the bird behind this grass here for the Z9. And you can see the bird is kind of in focus, but you can see that it's also trying to lock onto the grass to the left of the bird and on the log itself. Here's a very similar clip with the OM-1 Mark II, and I think it helps that the extra magnification factor with the micro four thirds sensor. The bird's a little bit larger in frame, but you can see that the autofocus is still getting tripped up on that log there. And I eventually switched to the single autofocus with manual focus, was able to gain focus and get some footage that way. And I think if I spent a little bit more time using the continuous autofocus mode and video mode for the OM-1 Mark II, I would have had more success with it, because I still had success with it when I used it. Here's an example with the green heron. It's wading across in the shallow section here using continuous autofocus, and you can see that it's tracking the bird nicely, locking onto the bird, and even as it approaches this vegetation here, it still locks onto the bird and does a nice job of tracking it. One example of where the continuous autofocus kind of trips up a little bit is with this eastern phoebe. It's locking onto it nicely when it's perched on the edge of this branch, but as the bird moves a little bit lower down on the branch, the autofocus gets a little bit confused by the bright sections on the tip of the branch where the bird previously was, so it misses focus just a little bit there. In order to eliminate that possibility of the camera missing focus, using the single autofocus with manual focus worked really well with subjects that were stationary. I was able to grab focus really quick and then keep the bird in focus as it was sitting there and not have to worry about the autofocus jumping off. Another thing to be aware of with the OM-1 Mark II is in the autofocus target modes, there aren't as many options as there are in photo mode. You're limited to just a couple different box sizes and then the whole area mode. So it's a little bit more limiting than in the photo mode target options. And I will say that in my time using the OM-1 Mark II, getting all this footage that I was getting, there wasn't a single time where I was like, oh man, I wish I had the Nikon gear because this would have been easier. No, I was able to get all the footage I wanted to with the OM-1 Mark II, and I was happy with it. So it's not like, oh, you really fall behind, you don't get the footage you want because the autofocus isn't there. Well, if you're relying on autofocus all the time, well then maybe you might miss some shots. But if you're like me, I'm typically using manual focus for things anyway. I'm used to that. I'm used to using manual focus with peaking. I'm able to work around things and see how things are working. And to me, the drawback of maybe some of the limitations with the autofocus, well then you have to think about the whole picture as a whole. You're able to get stabilization. So you have the stabilization, handheld footage, video footage at the magnifications that you have. So that's a huge bonus right there. And you have the weight reduction, so you're able to actually hand hold this for a long amount of time and get good stable footage. So If the autofocus isn't quite on par, I'm fine with that because you're still able to get some great footage of things that you would not have gotten handheld with a Nikon. So just think about that. And that was something I constantly thought about. Okay, now on to image quality. This is one that everybody was always interested in. It's Micro Four Thirds. What's the image quality like? Comparing that to full frame. So the image quality of the OM-1 Mark II is fantastic. I did not have any questions or any problems with it. These are just some of the photos that I really enjoy that I took over the past month with the OM-1 Mark II and the different lens combinations. So we have, beautiful common yellow throat in this lovely bed of purple flowers. I just really like the colors in this image. And again, that's one thing, the colors are really nice with the files. I was really happy with that. Obviously I'm used to Nikon colors, but the OM-1 Mark II colors are very nice as well. Some tree swallows in flight, again with that purple field down below. It's just really nice to be able to include those. And then as another common yellow throat, again in that the wildflowers, just having that extra color there. And then this is one that I really, really like. This is the raw file of a honeybee on some beautiful butterfly weed. And this is the raw file. Just look at the colors in this photo. It is really, really nice. And that was taken with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. So you're able to get some macro quality images with that lens because the focus distance is really close. Again, this kingfisher came so close to me. I've never been so close to a kingfisher before. But again, it was the ability to move and get myself into position with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. Otherwise, I would have been using a tripod for this. I was in a really awkward position, just trying to stay as still as possible, and this kingfisher landed right in front of me and just had this opportunity to do this. So I think you get the point. The image quality is fantastic with this camera. I have no qualms with using it whatsoever. And again, the thing to think about here, and this is something I'm going to reiterate later, with the crop sensor, you have about a 2x crop sensor with Micro Four Thirds, right? So with that, you're essentially able to crop in the field. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if I was shooting this at full frame, if I was using the 400 millimeter lens, in order to get the same field of view image here, I would have to crop into that full frame image. But with the 2x crop factor for the Micro Four Thirds, you're essentially able to crop in the field. So you're really able to get the composition that you want because you have that kind of extra reach, we'll just say, that narrower field of view. So you're able to do your cropping in the field. And obviously that has impact on depth of field and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to get into that because in a real world scenario and such, if you know how to use your system, understand how depth of field works, then you're able to manipulate depth of field a little bit and still get that really nice blurred out background. But you're able to work on composition out in the field instead of thinking, okay, I'm going to take this shot, but then I'm just going to go and crop it in post. What I found was I didn't have to do much cropping with these images. So it's a really nice thing. It really allows you to be more creative, makes you think a lot more about composition, what you want to include, what you want to try to eliminate. And by doing that, you're able to have some really nice image quality because the Micro Four Thirds, the OM-1 Mark II is a 20 megapixel sensor. So your files are going to be a lot smaller than the Z9. You might not want to crop in that much to kind of maintain the resolution. But because you're able to crop in the field, you're able to work on composition out in the field because you have that farther effective focal length, you're able to keep a full-size image without having to crop it. And that is a really, really neat thing. So what about high ISO and low light images, right? That's one of the most important things. Wildlife is active dawn and dusk. We need to have high ISO and be able to take photos on low light, okay? I went out on an early morning walk at a local park. Low light, sun was either not up yet or was just barely coming up and was coming through the trees. So these are a series of images that I took with high ISOs. The first one we're going to start with is just this cottontail rabbit here. Okay, so these are the raw files. Again, I'm going to show you the raw file first. And then what I did was I took a series of photos so that the first one I'm going to show you is the first one in the sequence. The next photo is the same settings, the same sequence of photos. The next one is just going to have some noise reduction in it with just Lightroom. Okay, I'm not using Topaz or anything like that. I personally don't like using any of those. I'd rather just be able to do everything in Lightroom, so that's what I do. And I'm going to tell you if I did the noise reduction either with the denoise, the AI software in Lightroom, or if I just used it through the masking. Okay, so the first one here is a cottontail rabbit. This is ISO of 10,000. We have 378 millimeters, f4.5 for the aperture, and the shutter speed of 1/400th of a second. Okay, so this is the raw file here. You can see that there's some noise in the image here. Okay, you zoom in to 100%, you can see that there's a lot of noise. Okay, now let's zoom back out and go to the next image in the sequence. So this is basically the next image in the sequence. You can see the rabbit was eating a little bit more of the grass. Same settings, we're still at ISO 10,000, same focal length, same aperture, same shutter speed. This is with just the denoise slider activated down here. Okay, so this is basically Lightroom's way of doing denoise, the AI denoise in the file. And I typically it does it at 50%. So I actually reduced this down to 34%. And let's zoom into 100%. And you can see the noise pretty much is eliminated there. There's still some in the background, but you can still see there's some detail in the animal still, and it just eliminates a lot of the noise there. Let's go back to the other image. So this is the raw file, 100%, no noise reduction, and then let's go to this one here. So you can see that just by doing that one little thing, you're able to basically eliminate the noise in your file. And again, I'd be using it probably close to this full-size image here because I don't feel like I need to crop in too much for these files. I'm not going to crop in this much for this image. I would have gotten closer if I wanted that. So you're able to see full size. Okay, this is the raw file again. A lot of image back here in the shadows and back up here in the backgrounds and down here in the foreground as well. This is just with a simple click of denoise, and you can see that that is pretty much eliminated and gone. Let's go to a next example. So this is some mallards down in the brook. I was shooting down them from a bridge. Again, these are not going to be stunning images. This is just examples of high ISO and what you can get here. Okay, so this is the raw file. Again, we're shooting at ISO 10,000. We're at an effective focal length of 1,000 millimeters because I was at 500 millimeter there. Aperture 5.6 and a shutter speed of 1/320. Zooming in 100%, you can see again there's noise in here. Okay, so we have a good amount of noise, especially up back in here. There's some noise up in the logs, that sort of thing. You can see some good amount of noise there. Now again, applying the denoise slider in Lightroom, this is what you get for the second file. Okay, so this is just the second sequence in the photo right after this. And again, this is denoise this time at 50%. For the slider, this is what it typically just comes when you click the denoise and activate it. And this is what you get. I mean, that is a clean file right there. The quality is still there. This is zoomed in 100%. The quality is still there on the bird. The detail is still there on the bird. There's detail on all of these leaves, all of these things. And it's like the noise is pretty much gone in this photo. All right, continuing with our high ISO images. Here's one of a Canada goose. I was really pushing the ISO up on this one, so we're at 25,600 for the ISO here. 400 millimeters, f5.6, and we had a shutter speed of 1/2000. So the sun had kind of come up a little bit more at this point, but I really wanted to push up the ISO to see, number one, what the files look like, and also see what could happen editing these. Here we are at 100%. You can see there's a lot of noise in this image. Obviously we're at 25,000 ISO, something I wouldn't typically be shooting in, but just to see what would happen, here again is the image, the next sequence in the image, same settings and same everything, processed with the denoise in Lightroom. Okay, so here we are. This is the raw file, and this is the one that is processed with the denoise noise reduction in Lightroom. Again, we are at 43, so you could actually push this up higher to eliminate some more noise. The problem with that being is you kind of end up, it almost doesn't look like a photo anymore. So I try to actually decrease it. But you can see, I mean, just at 100%, okay. Yes, there's still some noise present. Okay, you can still see some grain up there in the dark parts of the shadows. Okay, but look at the detail that you still get on the bird and all of the feathers. Okay, so let's just go back here. So this is the one with the denoise applied in Lightroom. This is the raw file. You can see how much it eliminates. And again, we're shooting at ISO 25,000 here. And again, the thing to think about here as well is there's always this question and notion with, oh, well, you can't crop in with a high ISO noise on Micro Four Thirds because the file is going to fall apart and that sort of thing. Because you're able to crop in the field with your sensor, the need to have to crop in post is drastically reduced, especially if you're using the same field techniques that you do with full frame gear. Like for full frame gear, 400 millimeters, I need to get close to my subjects. There's no way around it, okay? Even with the teleconverter engaged at 560 millimeters, 600 millimeters, you still need to get close to your subject because you just need to get a decent image in full frame gear, because you need to be far closer to your subject because the focal length just is limiting. But because with Micro Four Thirds gear, you have that 2x crop factor built into the sensor, you're able to, if you're using the same field techniques as you would with full frame gear, you're already going to be close enough to that wildlife and you're able to compose right in the scene, in the moment, and not have to crop in post. Okay, so I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. Well, you don't want to crop a 20 megapixel image because then you're going to get down to like an 8 megapixel image. You're not going to be able to do anything with it. But you're missing the point, because you don't need to crop in post necessarily, because you already did it in the field with proper field technique and proper composition and everything, thinking in the field, because you have a longer effective focal length. You're able to get that reach and get that subject how you want it in the frame a lot easier than with full frame gear. So that's just my 2 cents on that matter. Let's do another example here. So we have another one with this mourning dove. Okay, so this is down on the trail. I went down prone on the path there to get this image, so I was looking kind of straight at it. This is ISO 12,800, so another high ISO one, shutter speed of 1/640, and the focal length, 367 millimeters. So this is the raw file. Here you can see, again, there's a good amount of noise in the file. There's a lot of grain, a lot of noise, but the colors and detail are still there. It's still a nice image with the detail of the bird. This is another one where I used denoise, just one click in Lightroom, and this is what you get with the denoise activated. And this is dropped down to 21. Okay, so this could be increased. This is what it looks like when it is, processed from the software just immediately. I think it looks a little bit too painterly. It doesn't look real to me. I have a kind of a problem with that, with the kind of AI noise reduction stuff sometimes, but I reduced it down to, it was 21, to bring back some of that noise, bring back some of that texture, bring back some of that detail in the feathers. And again, that's what you get. Zoomed out to full size. That is plenty clear of an image for me. I don't. Noise is noise. If you're somebody who is like a stickler for the images need to be absolutely crisp and no noise whatsoever, okay, well, here's a trick for you. You could have photographed this subject because it was sitting here still. I could have photographed this subject at a slower shutter speed to drop down my ISO dramatically, and I would have gotten a cleaner image or a less noisy image of the subject because the subject wasn't moving. What about if you're like me and you don't want to rely on using these AI noise reduction things in Lightroom or any other thing? There's an option, and what I typically do for my photos is do noise reduction through masks in Lightroom. So here's an example, again, of a cottontail rabbit. This one is shot at 10,000 ISO, 300 millimeter, so 600 millimeter effective, f5.6, and a shutter speed of 1/400. I didn't use the denoise. You can see the denoise is not activated here in Lightroom. Instead, what I did was I did masks. Okay, so this will show the masks. So I masked the background. So everything in red here is the masks that I used. And then I applied noise reduction to just that background here. So we can scroll down and see I applied some noise reduction to just the background. So that way, if I zoom in here, there's still noise in the animal, but the noise in the animal for this instance here keeps some of the detail in the fur. It gives it some texture, gives it some, just kind of, the fur is going to be grainy and textured anyway. So it doesn't really matter if there's a little bit of noise in there, especially when you're looking at it full size here. But just trying to eliminate some of that noise in the background. So this is the image without any noise reduction processed in the image. So you can see there's a lot more grain in the background, but you notice that the rabbit doesn't change because I didn't apply noise reduction to the rabbit itself, just to the background to eliminate some of that grain in the background. So that's without the mask applied. Let me click here to apply the mask, and you can see that it reduced some of the grain a little bit and some of the texture in the background. Again, I'm not a stickler personally for reducing noise. I mean, I think that's plenty noise free for a 10,000 ISO image. There's going to be some texture. I think there should be some texture back there. We're photographing an asphalt path. There should be some texture in that. And I think that cleans up nice. For an ISO 10,000 image, there's no reason why that shouldn't be acceptable. And then here's just one last example. So here is a red-bellied woodpecker, ISO 8000. Again, I did masking on this one instead of doing the denoise. And again, this is not a fantastic image. We have a stick that's poking up here. It doesn't look good. That's not very good. Just focusing on shooting high ISO here and seeing what we can do with the files. So 100%, let's show you what it looked like without the mask applied. So there's a lot of noise up here. Again, we're shooting ISO 8000. There's going to be noise in the image. So what does it look like with the mask applied? Again, I just showed the background. So this is overlay here. So all the background pieces are applied on the mask. And then let's show it. That's without the mask applied, and then with the mask applied. So you can see it reduced some of the noise up here. And you can see they cleaned it up a little bit. It's not perfect. The masking oftentimes doesn't do as good of a job as the denoise software, as the AI software. But if you're submitting photos to contests or anything like that, chances are for most reputable contests, you're not going to be able to use this denoise software in Lightroom. You're going to have to use sliders because anything AI is not allowed for a lot of these competitions. So keep that in mind. Don't be reliant on using this denoise stuff for eliminating noise in your photos. Try using different masking techniques and eliminating things from your photos that way. It might not do as good of a job, but it still eliminates the noise, and you're still able to then get a photo that you'd be able to submit to one of these contests because there's no AI involved in manipulating the photo. So that's going to be it for the high ISO images. I think you can really see that you can easily work with these files at high ISOs. Definitely clean up nice, especially with different software options that are available today. And even with sliders, I'm happy with how they clean up, even at high ISOs. So now let's get into some more comparisons. And like I mentioned, I went down to a local pond with my Nikon Z9 and Z6 III 400mm 2.8 lens, and also the OM system OM-1 Mark II with the 150 to 400mm lens. I was able to set them up on a log side by side with one another and was able to get similar looking photos of the same subject in front of me. Now again, because I wasn't operating both cameras at the exact same time, there's going to be differences in these images I'm showing you and comparing. The lighting might have changed a little bit. The background probably definitely changed a little bit. There's different things in the photo, and the subject is going to be slightly different or positioned from me, but that also has to do with just the focal length of the full frame versus the micro four thirds. So there's going to be some differences in images. So keep that in mind. But I think it shows you really well comparisons with the same settings or very similar settings in both systems side by side, trying to figure out which photo came from which system. I think it'll be a really nice comparison to see, especially since some of these are kind of higher ISOs, up to 6400 and that sort of thing. Seeing the similarity in the noise levels in these images, I think, is going to be really eye-opening. And I just want to also point out that for the full frame photos, I cropped them to a 4:3 aspect ratio. Okay, obviously I didn't want to have the aspect ratio of the photo immediately give it away that that was shot on full frame. So I cropped them to 4:3 so that both images side by side, when you're looking at them full size, they're going to look the same aspect ratio wise. But I did not crop them in a lot. I only cropped them in on the long side of the photo. So they're still the full resolution. Height-wise, I just cropped them into 4:3 so that they would be the same size that way, okay? Another thing I wanted to mention was I also adjusted the white balance to match for the photos. I had it set to different white balances when I was out in the field, so I adjusted it in Lightroom just so that they would match a little bit better, and it wouldn't be obvious which one was shot from which system just because the colors were slightly different. So the first comparison we have here, again, I'm going to show you them full size, side by side. These are raw files, they're not edited at all, and I don't have any information up as to which camera each photo was shot on, so there's no indication which one's which. I'm going to leave them up for a few seconds, then I'm going to zoom in to 100%. So you can really see close up on the bird, kind of look at the noise levels and that sort of thing. And then I'm going to zoom back out to full size, and then we're going to reveal which photo was which. So if you want to try to guess, you need more time, pause the video so you can have more time looking at it. I don't want to take up too much time waiting to reveal which one was which. Okay, so the first comparison we have here is a beautiful water thrush. And again, remember, these subjects were moving, the lighting was different. This was just as close to a comparison as I could with each system without moving too much, scaring the subject away. And then we're going to zoom in to 100% on each one. I'll try to zoom in on the bird here. So now you can see at 100% zoomed in, you can see the birds are roughly the same size now. And you can see the amount of noise that's in the background of the images. Okay, so keep in mind these images are shot at the same settings. We're going to go over the settings really soon here, and then back out to full size. Photo on the left, that was shot on the OM-1 Mark II, the 150 to 400 millimeter. The one on the right was the Z9 400 millimeter. As far as information for the photos, so these are both shot at ISO 5000, 400 millimeter, f4.5. I have the apertures for both lenses set at 4.5 because that's obviously the aperture I can use with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. And the shutter speed is 1/640. So I think it's pretty clear, especially when you zoom in at 100. The noise for the images are practically the same. And I was honestly surprised by how similar these files were. And I hope that you can see how similar they are on your side and YouTube doesn't mess it up when it gets uploaded. But looking in Lightroom at these two files side by side, the noise levels and the amount of noise in the images is the same, no matter which camera you're looking at here, because the settings are the same, the exposure is the same. So a real-world comparison of these two cameras, you're getting practically the same image quality and noise levels when you have similar exposure settings. Okay, here we go for the next comparison. Okay, so this is the green heron. It was pretty far out across the log from me, across the pond from me. It was on this large tree that came down a while ago, and it was foraging off this log. Here it is at full size. I'll give you a couple seconds with full size. And then here we go in, zoomed in to 100%. Now again, at 100%, you can really see some noise in the files here, both of the files. And it also kind of, there was a lot of insects and kind of pollen and such on the water. And that kind of adds to the noise in the background, especially down along the water here. So this is 100%. And then this is, again, zoomed out. Okay, so for this one, the image on the left is the Nikon Z9 with the 400 millimeter. This was actually taken at 560 millimeters, so I had the internal teleconverter engaged there just to get a little bit more reach and to have more of an equivalent focal length. The photo on the right is the OM-1 Mark II, again with the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. The photo with the Z9, so the one on the left here, that is at ISO 5000, aperture 4.5, and a shutter speed of 1/800th of a second. So the light was a little bit brighter in that instance. So in order to get the same exposure for the OM-1 Mark II, I had the same ISO. So the ISO was still 5000. Aperture was still the same at 4.5. But in this instance, the light dropped a little bit. So I had a shutter speed slightly slower at 1/640th of a second. So when you zoom in, you can see, again, if you're looking at the background, the dark sections, the shadows are going to show the noise the most. So we're looking at the background here, and to me, that's very similar, if not the same. You're not gaining anything by shooting full frame in this instance, based on what I'm seeing here. Because this was pretty far away from me, the background looks very similar. Even though you're shooting at a shallower depth of field, technically with the full frame gear, the background still looks very similar. There might be a little bit more detail back here than in here, but again, it's very, very similar. Third comparison. Okay, so this one is actually a comparison between the Nikon Z6 III and the OM-1 Mark II. So here we go again. We are at full size. Give you a couple seconds with that. And then let's zoom into 100% on the bird. Again, you can see that the bird is taking up roughly the same size in the frame here at 100%. And then here we have it. So the image on the left is the OM-1 Mark II, the 150 to 400 millimeter lens. The image on the right is the Z6 III taken at 560 millimeters with the teleconverter engaged there in the 400 2.8. The image with the OM-1 Mark II, so these are both at ISO 400. OM-1 Mark II, the one on the left here, is at 400 millimeters, so an effective 800 millimeters. Both at the same 4.5 aperture. And again, the lighting had changed. It was kind of going in and out here on this day. So the OM-1 Mark II image over here is taken at 1/1600th of a second for shutter speed. And to get similar exposure, proper exposure, the shutter speed for the Z6 III is at 1/2500. There's practically no noise in either of these images. Very clean images, very sharp. Both have really nice detail in the feathers and the beak, the eyes. Everything is just really nice. There's detail on the log as well that it's sitting on. So both really, really nice images. I wouldn't be concerned or have a problem with working with either of these images here. Okay, so here we are with the second to last comparison that I have. So here they are at full size. This beautiful green heron came walking up really close to me. I was really happy to, number one, be able to get any of these shots because I've never been so close to a green heron before. But number two, to be able to compare these two systems in this situation because I was in full camouflage here and I was able to switch between the two camera systems slowly. And that's why you can see a real kind of big difference in the vegetation around the bird and actually how close the birds were because I just took it really slow. So the bird had moved a pretty substantial distance in the time that I switched the systems just so I wouldn't spook it. Now let's zoom in to 100% just on the bird's head here. Again, the size of the bird is different in these photos because the animal was moving towards me. I didn't want to move quickly to spook it. So this is, again, the raw files. And it kind of looks like I was potentially shooting through a stick here. There might have been something kind of right here. But you can see how much detail you'd be able to retain in this file when you edit it. But these are just the raw files. You can see that the noise levels, again, there's a lot of noise in both of these files. It's a little bit more noticeable in this one because it has a darker background, but if you look down here, kind of in the darker water, you'll be able to see it's very similar noise levels. I mean, the noise is the same no matter which sensor, which camera, which format you're using. If you're using the same exposure settings, which I was exactly in this one, you get the same noise in the image. So drum roll, the one on the left is the Z9 and the 400mm 2.8 lens. The heron came really close to me. You can see that was at 400mm. The bird was really close to me to get that frame filling shot. The one on the right was the OM-1 Mark II, the 150-400 at 400mm. They both had an aperture of 4.5, and they both had a shutter speed of 1/1250. But let's get into the last comparison, and then we can kind of talk about this further and kind of the implications of this further. So here we are again. I think this is possibly the best comparison because the heron again was just so similar. It wasn't moving that much, so it was in a really similar pose. The background's pretty similar. It had moved up a little bit on the left image here to be kind of along. You can see the grass back here is right behind the bird. This was it moving up to that grass, which is right over here. The lighting was actually very similar in this one as well, which was nice. They were both in some nice sunlight as they're kind of walking up along this log. So here they are at full size. And then let's zoom in to 100% on the animal here. Kind of look at the detail that you get on the feathers. And then the noise levels in the background here. So that color is kind of similar to up here. You can see the noise, the grain in the image. So now the image on the left is from the OM-1 Mark II, 150-400mm lens. And then the one on the right is the Z9, 400mm. And actually for this one, to try to get equivalent fields of view, the photo on the left of the OM-1 Mark II, I shot at 300mm focal length. And then the one on the right, I shot at, with the Z9, I shot at 560mm. So I zoomed out a little bit with the OM-1 Mark II to try to get equivalent focal lengths or field of view for both of these full-size images, okay? But everything else is the same. So the ISO is at 4,000, aperture is at 4.5, and the shutter speed is 1/1000th of a second. So you can see, because the resolution, you get a bigger file size with the Z9. When you zoom into 100%, you zoom in a little bit farther. That's kind of what happens with different megapixel sensors. I could have, if I wanted to have the animal larger in frame with the OM-1 Mark II, I could have zoomed in. I had another 100mm to zoom into if I wanted to, or I could have zoomed in another 400mm essentially if I engaged that teleconverter to get it to 1000mm. So I could have, in this instance, had a much larger bird in frame here, but because I was trying to compare these two, I shot at this one. So that's, again, if you're in the field with this Micro Four Thirds gear, you're able to crop in the field to get the animal the size that you want in the frame, and it really helps you not have to do too much cropping in post. But again, you can see both the images, again, very similar noise, very similar things going on here with the sensor, with the quality of the images. If you looked at this image alone hanging on a wall somewhere, you're not going to be able to tell that it was shot on a Micro Four Thirds camera. The images are the same. Obviously, with the full frame, and this is a good example where you can see the difference in depth of field. The full frame image has a more blurred out and kind of creamy looking background because it has a shallower depth of field in this instance. In the OM In the Micro Four Thirds sensor, because you have that crop factor and it adjusts your depth of field in the image, you have a little bit more of a background and possibly distracting background for these images. It just really depends on how close you are to your subject, how close the background is to your subject, and what magnification you are using. I think it's pretty clear to see that when you're looking at both of these images side by side, from the Nikon Z9 or Z6 III, comparing them to the images with the OM-1 Mark II, when you're shooting at the same camera settings, you're going to get the same looking file. Okay, the difference is going to be, okay, maybe the background is going to be different, or the how large the animal in frame is going to be different. The noise levels and everything like that, and the detail is going to be basically the same, which is not something I was expecting. I was expecting, you always hear, full frame sensors handle noise better, so they're always going to be cleaner files than Micro Four Thirds or a cropped sensor. From my comparison and what I've seen based on what I've shot in the field, comparing these two, if you're shooting at the same camera settings, same exposure settings, your files look the same. You have the same amount of noise in your images, and I think the important thing to remember here is it's important to expose properly in the field. So both of these images have basically the same exposure. I mean, we can look here on the histogram there on the right. You can see that I exposed to the right. You have a lot of information in that file, and you can see I didn't clip off any highlights. So I have a lot of information all the way up to the right side of that histogram. OM-1 Mark II photo of that sequence there that we compared, and you can see again the exposure is spot on. Exposed to the right, a lot of information in that file, a lot of information to work with, and that allows you to have a nice clean image to work with in post. So I think that's an important thing to think about, is maybe if you're having trouble with having high ISO images with cropped sensors, you need to make sure you're exposing properly in the field, because otherwise, if you would underexpose this and then you tried to bring up the exposure in Lightroom, well, then you might have an issue and the image might really go down the tubes pretty quick. Okay, so now we're going to get into camera features. Okay, so what I mean by this is we're going to talk about different frame rate options. We're going to talk about different features in the camera for the OM-1 Mark II. And as you'd expect for any pro level body, the OM-1 Mark II has a lot of different features in it. Number one, we're going to talk about just frame rates. So photo mode, you're able to have a lot of different sequential frame rate options. So you're able to customize your frame rates. For me, it has the frame rates that I use constantly. Typically, I'm shooting around 20 frames per second for photos. So I'm able to customize that. I was typically in about 16 frame rate. But you can go up higher than that if you need to. So there's a lot of customization there. And then also you're able to have pre-capture in the OM-1 Mark II. So you're able to shoot raw, you're able to get raw photos in pre-capture mode, so that you're able to get photos before you fully press the shutter. So if you have that turned on, you're able to half press the shutter, it starts engaging that mode, it starts recording photos, and then when you fully press the photo, you're able to get a sequence of photos before you actually press the photo, before you press the shutter, which really is really useful for subjects that are moving. If a bird's flying off a perch, you're able to really get that full sequence of photos. Even if your how quick you press the shutter isn't really on par with how quick the animal's moving, you're still able to capture a lot of those images. And again, those are raw, so you're able to really work with those images better. Some other features of the camera, so obviously OM system is known for their features in that camera. So they have focus stacking in camera so that it will combine all of those photos into one raw file. Does it all for you in camera. Really, really useful for macro work. You have the high-res photo mode, which allows you to get either a 50 megapixel image or an 80 megapixel image if you're using handheld or tripod, which is really nice for landscape work. And also if you have a subject that is still, you're able to turn on high-res mode and get a much higher resolution image of a still subject and work with that file there. And I found that I wasn't very successful with it because I was trying it on subjects that were moving just a little bit too much. But when I was using that, it really helps to eliminate a lot of noise in the image because it actually combines a series of photos into one higher megapixel image. And basically, as far as camera features go, the OM-1 Mark II has all the features that I commonly use in the Z9, Z6 III. It has all the features that I need, plus those other features, the computational features. Has the live ND filter, also has HDR mode. So it has a lot of different features you can use, and it allows you to do it all basically in camera without having to combine too much in post. So a lot of nice features. Everything I pretty much would need is in the OM-1 Mark II, plus some of those other nice features that you can use there. And then getting into customization of the camera, I did a whole video on how I customize the buttons. The OM-1 Mark II, I'll have a link to that video down below if you're interested in that. But again, as you'd expect for a pro level body, the OM-1 Mark II is highly customized. You can customize pretty much every button on the camera, and you can customize it to do whatever you want. I did not have a problem in customizing the camera. I was able to customize it exactly how I wanted it, to be able to change exposure settings and autofocus settings exactly how I wanted it. I was able to do it quickly in the field without having to dig deep into the menus. There's also the custom modes up top on the dial, so you're able to have custom mode banks. You can customize there as well. And then you're also able to create a custom menu option, so you're able to just put things that you want in that menu bank so you can easily find them and quickly find them. So it's a highly customizable camera, really easy to use and customize it so that you can make it work for however you're photographing or whatever you're photographing in that situation. So as far as features in video mode, the only thing that was lacking in the OM-1 Mark II was that it did not have 4K 120p frame rate option for video. It goes up to 60p for 4K. You're able to shoot in high definition, full HD, up to 200p, which is nice. Be able to shoot in full HD in that mode. But the only thing that's lacking, and the only thing that was really lacking in feature-wise for the OM-1 Mark II, is that it didn't have that 120p in 4K. So you just miss a little bit of that slow motion capability when you're doing video, if that's something you constantly do. I'm just going to talk about the camera body here, OM-1 Mark II by itself, with how many features that it has, the different components that it has, the different functions that it has, the autofocus, and everything combined, the stabilization. The OM-1 Mark II is a steal for the price point. And especially right now, I'm pretty sure it's on sale right now. So you get a lot in that small little camera body. And pretty much you get, like I said, all the features that I use in the Z9, which is a much more expensive camera body, you get in the OM-1 Mark II with the exception of the 120p. Obviously, the Nikon Z9 has a lot of other features in it. You can shoot 8K, you can do auto capture, that sort of thing. But those are not features that I use. I don't shoot in 8K. I don't need to shoot auto capture stuff. But if you're just concerned with autofocus, image quality, stabilization, and all of these other benefits of the computational modes that you have in this camera, the OM-1 Mark II is a steal. You get a lot of features. You basically have autofocus that I think is practically on par with more expensive cameras. You're able to get some really nice footage, really nice image files. It handles low light really well, and you're able to get really close to your subjects because you're able to have that 2x crop factor with the micro four thirds sensor. So you get a lot in this camera. It's a very feature-rich camera, and again, it's a lot cheaper than some other cameras that have the same kind of features in it. And then as far as lenses go, so the 150 to 400 millimeter lens is the exception to a lot of micro four thirds gear. It is the most expensive lens that they offer, the OM system offers. It's also probably one of the heavier ones. It is the heaviest one. But as a general rule, when you're comparing micro four thirds gear and lenses to the full frame equivalent, you're going to be able to have the lenses in a smaller form factor and a lighter form factor. Like I said, the 150 to 400 is the exception. It's a big, expensive lens, but the features that you get in that lens and the reach that you're able to get in that lens, the versatility with that lens makes it so that it's that price point. There's a reason why it's that expensive. There's a reason why it's the pro lens, But if you're looking at a cheaper alternative, a lighter alternative, the 100 to 400 millimeter lens has phenomenal image quality as well. It's a lighter, smaller package. You can also do the 300 millimeter f4 prime lens, gives you the equivalent focal length of 600 millimeter, and you're still able to get some really nice detail that I've seen with that lens as well. So as a general rule, you get really nice focal length, especially for wildlife, and smaller form factors and smaller things to carry around. So let's just do some quick limitations here. So what are the limitations of the OM-1 Mark II that I found? So number one, doesn't shoot in 120p in video, staying in the video idea. So it uses 2 SD cards for the memory. So I'm used to using CF Express Type B cards, which are very, very fast in writing and reading. So I found that when I was switching from photo mode to video mode in the OM-1 Mark II, there was a little bit of a lag. So if you're recording video, you stop recording, there's about, I've clocked it as about a 2-second to 3-second lag from when it stops recording to when it just finishes writing the information to the card. In that time, you can't switch from photo to video mode. Just the write speed on these cards are a little bit slower with SD, and I'm using the fastest cards I can find, which writes at 299, I believe, or 300 megabits per second, which is the fastest SD cards that I can find. If you take a really long burst in photo mode, again, it's going to take a couple of seconds to clear that buffer to finish writing those photos onto the card before you can switch to video mode. Okay, just a limitation, just a little quirk you have to be aware of. Another thing I noticed in video mode was once you start recording video, you can't change your ISO. So if you need to adjust your exposure when you've recorded video, you need to adjust your exposure either through the shutter speed or the aperture. Otherwise, if you want to adjust ISO values, you need to stop recording and start recording again with the new ISO value. Again, it's not really a big deal. Once you realize it, you just kind of work around with it. And it's nice not to have to change exposure when you're recording video anyway. But those are the biggest limitations or kind of quirks that I found using the gear the past month. And again, once you use the gear for a couple of days, a week, you get to recognize these different things. Every gear has its limitations. And these are just the things that I noticed when I was using it. Okay, so getting into the last parts of this video here, the last things I want to cover. So who is this gear for? And the short answer, I think, to that question is if you're like me, this gear is for you. Okay, so I hike around a lot with my gear. I have a lot of gear with me in my backpack. I usually have 2 camera bodies with me. A lot of different lenses to get the footage that I do for my YouTube videos and also for clients. So the weight is a huge factor for a lot of things. I also like to prioritize the experience over the technical side of things of photography. For me personally, photography kind of came as a byproduct of being out in nature and enjoying nature when I record nature. So for me, like I said, I'm not the technical, this is what the sensor is doing, this is how it reads the information. I'm not that technical of a guy. That's not what I'm interested in. To me, what's interesting and beneficial to me is how can I use this camera in my hand to help me record and capture this moment out in nature? It's important for me to have a system that allows me to do that, allows me to do it quickly, quietly, without disturbing the wildlife, and to be able to capture what I'm actually seeing successfully. So those are the things that I prioritize, and the OM system gear allowed me to do that. Like I said, I actually lost track of time out in the field using this gear because I was able to immerse myself more in the process of creating images and capturing the footage that I wanted to, rather than being kind of dragged down by the weight of the gear. And I know I keep saying that, weight is a huge factor, but it is a huge factor, especially when you're out long days with a lot of gear on your back. By the end of the day, you just want to get that stuff off and just be done with it. Having lighter weight kit allows you to go farther, push yourself farther, and be more creative in the field. And that is really where the OM system gear shines. It is a freeing experience. I was able to be out with this gear, have my daughter strapped to my back, and still create some really nice images. And it's stuff that I wouldn't have been able to get if I was lugging around my 400 2.8 or even just my 100 to 400, the smaller lens, but it wouldn't have the focal length or it wouldn't have the stabilization. So everything combined with this OM system gear really works together to create an experience that is really rewarding and really beneficial if you're out there trying to photograph wildlife or nature, or just to be able to get lost in nature itself. It really allows you to do that. There wasn't a single point when I was out using this gear where I thought to myself, oh, I wish I had my full frame gear for this shot or something like that. It just isn't something that crossed my mind. And it was because I was able to be in the creative moment. I was able to get great results with the OM system gear. And once you spend some time with it and realize how it works and the best way to make things work, just like any system, you're going to get great results out of it. Some of my favorite photos that I've taken this year were with the OM system gear. I was able to really work on my composition. I was able to really work on my field technique to be able to get the images that I wanted to and enjoy the process throughout the entire thing. And that is why I'm going to actually be transitioning into using OM system gear. Been kind of thinking about this in the back of my head for months now, and this has just kind of helped me realize that this is a possibility. There's excellent results out of it, and I'm more than happy with what I was able to get and enjoying the experience. And I'm really looking forward to using this gear down the road, and I'm really excited to see what I can get out of it, especially looking back on the footage that I've been able to get. So I'm really excited to be using the OM system gear down the road. And I'm not saying that, OM system gear or Micro Four Thirds gear is for everyone, but I do really hope that everyone is able to experience just the joy and creative freedom that I experienced using the OM system gear. I think that can happen for different gear, for different people. For me, it happened with this gear, the OM system gear. So I really hope that everybody can experience that. And maybe you should test it out yourself as well. Give it a chance. Go to your local camera store, see if you can loan the gear and test it out yourself and see how it feels and see what you're able to get with the gear in your hand. So that's going to be it. Thank you so much for those of you that stuck around and watched the whole thing. I hope this was beneficial and helpful for you. I hope the comparison helps you see the differences in full frame to Micro Four Thirds. And if you're interested in purchasing any of this gear, I have affiliate links down below for the gear that I used. Again, if you use those links, I get a little bit of a benefit through the purchase. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but I really do appreciate it. And that is gear that I'm going to be eventually getting myself down the road as well. So again, I hope this video answered your questions. If you have any other questions, I didn't cover anything or something that you're interested in, let me know in the comment below. I'll try my best to answer it. Again, I had to return this gear because of the end of the loan period, but I spent a lot of time with it going through the menus and that sort of thing. So I'll try to answer it as best as I can. So that'll be it. Like I said, keep an eye out for my Connecticut Forest project. I'm working on editing that video and compiling the footage for that video. It's going to be released in the next couple of weeks. And I'm also going to be putting together a video all on the video settings and the video options that I had and used for the OM-1 Mark II in another upcoming video as well. So you keep an eye out for those ones. If you're interested in those videos, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. It's a quick and easy way to show your support. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it answered your questions, and I will see you again really soon. Thank you so much.